Epic Rap Battle Parodies is a strange series. When it first debuted on December 24th of 2012, it quickly gained traction, and over time it became one of the earliest, most well-known fan-made rap battle channels out there. Despite the massive influx of newer and frankly much better battles to come from the fan-made rap battle community since then, erbparodies has pretty much earned its place in the community's history. Before the days of Freshy Canal and other similar channels having consistently high-quality battles, this was a time period where pretty much anything went. It was basically the Wild West era of fan-made rap battles. The results were mixed, to say the least. And we're gonna review them all, starting with the ever-so-beloved Season 1. Yay, I'm gonna keel over and die. Originally, I was going to rank every single one of the battles on the channel through one giant ranking list, but then after writing a few entries, I got burned out from finishing the full thing after I realized the sheer magnitude of battles I would have to go through in one video. So instead, we're going to be looking at these battles season by season, not only to cut down on writing time and get these rankings out faster, but also so that the stuff I already did write doesn't end up going to waste. Let's not waste any more time here. This is Epic Rap Battle Parodies Season 1, ranked worst to best. Roll it.
Yo, what's up? I'm Eminem, and you're right.
Eminem versus Macklemore. Holy moly, roly-poly-oly, what a shit show this is. Eminem vs. Macklemore was the second to last episode of Season 1 before the finale, James Bond vs. Austin Powers, was released. This was around the time when royales were just starting to become a new concept in rap battles ever since ERB made their first royale, Rasputin vs. Stalin, in April of 2013. Naturally, it seemed like erbparodies wanted to be part of this new concept, so less than a month later, erbparodies released their first royale. And how well was it received? Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised. Even as a young kid who had basically no real standards of what good quality was back then, I still thought this was awful. And rewatching it nowadays certainly didn't help. In fact, it made it even worse because I saw a lot more problems with it, one of which being before you even click on the video. Really? The title says Eminem vs. Macklemore, but when you look at the thumbnail accompanying it, both the old and new versions, it's practically impossible to tell which is which. Just from looking at it, would you have guessed that this guy was supposed to be Eminem and that this guy was supposed to be Macklemore? Neither of them look a thing like who they're portraying, and if it wasn't for the title cards, I doubt I would have ever been able to tell. The matchup seems fine at the start, both white rappers that have two M's in their names, but as the battle goes on, it just gets more and more confusing. It's supposed to be a royale between white rappers, starting with Eminem and Macklemore, and continuing on with Andy Milonakis, Idea, Mac Miller, and Kid Rock, with the final guy being a famous black rapper, Tupac. I kind of get what they were going for, but the people they chose to put in this royale are odd choices to say the least. I mean, I get Idea and maybe Mac Miller, but Andy Milonakis was more of an MTV show host, and Kid Rock is known more for rock than he is rap, hence Kid Rock. It's choices like these that make me question why this had to be a royale in the first place. If they had just waited a couple years so that white rappers would be more of a common thing, like MGK, Logic, and Lil Dicky, I'd understand more, but as it stands, it makes it look like they were struggling to come up with more opponents to justify its existence. The reason why Rasputin vs. Stalin worked as a royale was because the rappers all felt like they had a connection to each other. For better or worse, they each had a role in Russian history and were all well known for them. Sure, they all lived in mostly different time periods, but it still felt like a natural progression and none of them felt out of place. With Eminem vs. Macklemore, the connection is just white rappers. And even then, it's extremely flimsy at best, because yes, when I think of Eminem, I also totally think of Andy fucking Milonakis. But hey, just because the matchup is weak, that doesn't mean the battle itself will be weak either, right? I mean, it has been proven that you can make a good battle out of weird matchups. So how about this one? Yeah, it's a pile of shit. Like, oh my god, this battle may actually be one of the most borderline unwatchable battles I have ever seen in my life. The writing is all over the place, mainly consisting of either song title puns, shallow insults, filler lines, gibberish words like de-homed,
Dudes get de-homed,
or swagger jacker,
Unlike this swagger jacker,
or sometimes even just blatant homophobia. Pretty much none of these lyrics feel like what any of these rappers would actually write, and feel completely disconnected to the rappers' writing styles. Sometimes they just straight up contradict the rappers themselves. For example, Macklemore calling Eminem the F-slur despite himself being gay in real life. Whoopsies. I can buy someone like Slim Shady saying these lyrics, but definitely not Macklemore, or anyone else in this battle for that matter. The only one I could actually tolerate was Idea's verse, since that one actually felt like it somewhat tried, and has pretty much the only genuinely good line in the whole battle. Just remember you can kill the man, but not the idea. But otherwise, it's a giant mess. The Mac Miller verse especially is quite possibly the worst rap battle verse I've ever heard. There's no disses, no actual references, no rhyme or reason. It's just Mac Miller spouting pointless gibberish, wasting the audience's time, and having zero impact on the battle at all. No, seriously, you could take his entire verse out of the battle and practically nothing would change. None of the other rappers ever acknowledge him after his verse is done, which makes his entire inclusion in the battle completely pointless. This verse is honestly the whitest shit I've ever seen.
It's too white! It's too white!
The visuals are really poor as well, both from the costumes and the editing. I already mentioned how Macklemore and Eminem look nothing like who they're supposed to be, but they're not the only examples. Idea looks nothing like Idea. Mac Miller looks nothing like Mac Miller. Kid Rock looks nothing like Kid Rock. Tupac has hair. Surprisingly, the only one that actually looked the most accurate was Andy Milonakis of all people. I have no strong feelings towards this since I never watched any of Andy Milonakis' stuff, but I just thought this was surprising. The editing is as bad as you'd expect a Season 1 battle to be. It was 2013 after all. But the thing that bugs me the most about it is what I consider to be my biggest pet peeve in any bad rap battle. The subtitles. As soon as it gets to Andy's verse, they're off flow for the rest of the battle and never get back on track. I understand editing software glitches, especially on a piece of shit like Sony Vegas, but did no one think to double check what this looked like? Did no one on the crew watch the battle before it was uploaded? This would have been so easy to fix too. Literally just shift the timing of the subtitles so they actually sync up with the audio. The entire point of the subtitles is so the audience can understand what the rappers are saying and follow along to the audio, making it easier for them to catch the disses and references. When you have something like this happen, it throws the entire video off and leaves the audience feeling confused and frustrated, which is precisely what I felt watching this hunk of garbage. Confused and frustrated. It's not catchy, the lyrics and rapping suck, the video is unwatchable, and it's overall an awful battle all around, whether you're a fan of any of these rappers or not. I have no intentions of rewatching it ever again, and I have no issues with calling this not only the worst episode of Season 1, but the worst episode of Epic Rap Battle Parodies, period. Now, I feel like I'm forgetting to mention something about Tupac's verse, specifically something about his appearance. I feel like there's just one little aspect that makes his whole entire verse in the battle extremely problematic and uncomfortable to watch. Oh, I got it! His keying is so bad that part of his jacket blends into the background, making it look like he has a giant hole in his chest. Come on guys, that's just lazy. Phew, at least we now got that out of the way. And since we started at the bottom, at least now we know it can't get much worse from here. That means the next battle is much better, right? Right? Harry Potter vs. Percy Jackson is a giant pile of shit, and I regret having the misfortune of witnessing this abomination of mankind. When making this list, I guess I kind of already expected that I wouldn't have a lot of nice things to say about the ones on the lower end of the list. Season 1 was where they started out, after all. But fuck me if some of these battles are hard to rewatch nowadays, and this right here is one of them. This battle sucks.
I am a brave, spirited, natural leader, willing to risk my life for friends. I'd say the same for you, but you don't have parents.
How does that work? Where does that expression come from? It doesn't make any sense.
Make it stop!
Now, there are actually a couple reasons why I put this slightly above Eminem vs. Macklemore. One, it's shorter and not a royale, which thankfully means there's much less battle to get through. Second, the subtitles, while horribly keyed out, are at least on sync with what the rappers are saying, so it's slightly more bearable to watch. Keyword being slightly. And third, at least with this one I can tell who the rappers are just from looking at the thumbnail. But yeah, other than that I got nothing else good to say about this shit. First and foremost, the main reason why this battle is so terrible is because it's lazy on all sides. Whether you're a Harry Potter fan, a Percy Jackson fan, or you haven't read either series and are just a casual viewer, this battle presents nothing enjoyable to all three of these sides. And I mean nothing! On the Harry Potter side, it's shit. The only thing I'll give it is that the costume for Harry himself is okay. Judging from the tan jacket, it looks like they went for the Deathly Hallows look. But surprisingly, the verse is actually written very well and does justice to the Harry Potter name. Ha! JK! There are barely any actual references to the Harry Potter franchise, and when there is, it's mostly just watered down to sex and gay jokes. No references to any of Harry's accomplishments, no mention of any other characters except Ron and Hermione, not even so much as a mention of anything noteworthy in the series that isn't basic name drops. The most we get out of it is a mention of Harry having no parents, and that's pretty much it. This is Harry Potter we're talking about. You have a plethora of content to work with here, and you're telling me the best you can come up with is my basilisk is Slytherin to Anna's Chamber of Secrets?
Come on, man!
Fucking Gandalf versus Dumbledore did better with utilizing Harry Potter. And that battle had the most gay jokes of any ERB. And actually, speaking of ERB, I will say it is funny that both ERB and ERB parodies use basically the same Slytherin line in their respective Harry Potter battles, except one is delivered much better than the other. Also, I'm 99% sure they cast Xander as Ron Weasley just because he happened to have red hair. It's amazing how much 2013 Xander did not look like Ron otherwise. On the Percy Jackson side, it's shit. There are even less references to Percy Jackson than there are to Harry Potter, with the most being, Percy is the hero of Olympus. Percy knows Greek gods. He has dyslexia. Grover and Annabeth exist. Derp. Again, the Percy Jackson series is not something that's hard to pull decent references from. You can certainly do better than Hermione took my magic wand and gave it a lick. Sometimes it's just straight up contradictory. Like for example this line when Percy calls Harry a half-blood bitch. Percy, you also happen to be a half-blood. You literally attend a camp that is in fact called Camp Half-Blood. No wonder people call you Seaweed Brain. The Percy costume is just okay. I'm guessing it's based off of how he looks in the movies, but Justin just did not fit for the role of Percy at all. Also, what is he even carrying? It certainly doesn't bear any resemblance to his sword Riptide, but it's certainly not as bad as what they did to Grover.
Oh! Ew! What the fuck?
Yes, this hooded white teenager is supposed to resemble Grover Underwood, and whether he based it off the books or the movies, he looks absolutely nothing like him. Great casting choice, guys.
Ha! JK!
On the casual viewer side, it's shit. The editing is extremely minimal, with both sides having terrible green screens as part of the course of ERB Parody Season 1, and barely any moving at all. In fact, I swear the battle gets less and less editing as it goes on. Percy's is just your standard close-up shot, far shot editing. Harry's is just one take with one side shot and the top of his head cut off. Grover flies for one moment and then stays in one place for the rest of his verse while his clone dances in the background. And Ron straight up doesn't have any editing at all. Also, side note, where are they even supposed to be? These backgrounds certainly don't look like Hogwarts or Camp Half-Blood. As for the audio, forget it. Mic quality is awful, flow is awful, rapping is awful, mixing is awful. I don't know what else to say about it, it's just awful. I won't hold it against ERBP since, again, this was their first season, and it was like 2013, and they have improved leaps and bounds since then. But looking back on it, this is one of those battles that is just pretty much unwatchable by today's standards. It's a disservice to both series that waste such a good matchup, it's a slog for a casual viewer to sit through, and it's just overall a painful experience. I do think Eminem vs. Macklemore is slightly worse for various reasons, but believe me, that's not all that high of a bar to pass. This battle gives me the same feeling as I did watching those god-awful live-action Percy Jackson films. Completely disrespectful to its source materials, and an awful ride all around that leaves me visibly cringing in my seat. If you're looking for a good Harry Potter battle, just watch ERB's Harry Potter vs. Luke Skywalker, or the Chaotic Rap Battles version as well. Both are a much more enjoyable experience. But unless you're looking to feel like you got your soul sucked out by a Dementor, stay away from Harry Potter vs. Percy Jackson at all costs. And overall, it's still better than Cursed Child, or the Fantastic Beasts films, or Hogwarts Legacy, or J.K.
You want it? It's yours, my friend.
You know, now that I think about it, you don't see a lot of salesmen being prominent characters in fictional work. Sure, in real life you got people like Phil Swift, Billy Mays, and Vince Offer, but when it comes to fiction, there's not a whole lot of noteworthy salesman characters. I certainly can't think of any off the top of my head that are main characters, so I guess we're stuck with side characters when it comes to this sort of thing. Two of those being the Merchant from Resident Evil and the Happy Mask Salesman from Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. And what happens when you put them in a battle together? Well, you probably could get a decent battle out of it, it's just that this isn't one of them. Merchant vs. Happy Mask Salesman is so slow! I swear, every second watching this battle felt longer than it actually was, like it was sucking precious minutes out of my life that I couldn't get back. It's only 2 minutes long, and yet this felt like 5 at the very least. The beat to this battle drags on for so much that it feels extremely unfitting for a rap battle format, and the flow and lyrics certainly don't help to fill up that time. There's lots of awkward pauses, parts where the rappers slow down to let the beat catch up because they didn't write enough words, and the actual lyrics themselves are some of the blandest shit I've ever heard. There is not a single line in this battle that actually stands out enough to be worth remembering. It's clear that they were struggling to find anything to diss or write lines about from both of these source materials, and the writing suffers as a result. Oh yeah, the video is complete garbage too. For one, the subtitles are so poorly keyed out that it looks like they're fading out into the background, making them borderline unreadable at times. You already know my gripes with subtitles from Eminem vs. Macklemore, so we'll move on from that. The Merchant's costume is fine, there's not really all that much to work with, but Happy Mask Salesman looks like he's just getting out of bed, with those pajama-looking clothes and that pillow he's using as a backpack. Not really sure what's going on with the backgrounds either. Happy Mask Salesman's is just a Majora's Mask Google Images wallpaper, and Merchant's is some sort of graveyard with hunters spazzing out for some reason, and some very, very shitty torches. I don't even really have that much else to say. This is one of the most skippable battles of the entire series, and honestly you wouldn't be missing much. It's a piece of garbage. Moving on.
Nico, it's Roman! Let's go bowling!
John Marston vs. Nico Bellic, the third battle of the series, and one that totally didn't steal its beat and concept from a much better ERB that came out a few months before. I will say that I did find this more watchable than Merchant vs. Happy Mask, because this one is at least memorably awful. With it being among the earlier start of the series, it does have that early YouTube parody charm to it, and there are a good handful of meme-worthy lines and scenes from this battle. My favorite one is the part where they just randomly stop the battle to have Roman Bellic call Nico to ask to go bowling. It's so out of nowhere, and yet I can't help but laugh like a loser when I see it.
Let's go bowling!
For the last time, I don't want to go bowling.
It's an awful battle that I love. But it's still an awful battle nonetheless. I've never played GTA or Red Dead Redemption, so I can't really comment on the portrayal of the characters or how accurate they are to the games, but given that it's a Season 1 ERBP, I don't really have high hopes for them, and this battle certainly doesn't help me learn about them in any way. What I will say is that these visuals look like absolute ass. Out of all the bad green screens I've seen from the series, this is easily the worst offender. Nico's keying is turned up too much to where he looks like a ghost with those transparent edges he has, and Marston just looks like a fucking burnt granola bar. Justin somehow looks worse here than when he played Cole Phelps and Mozart, and those were the first 2 battles, so what happened here? What the hell, man? The subtitles are fine, but a majority of the editing is just them jumping around, often not in time to the backgrounds, getting cut off and just being a floating torso, and the backgrounds are just shit you can find on Shutterstock. And it's not like the audio is any better. Aside from the aforementioned stolen beat, Marston's audio is too quiet and mumbly to understand what he's saying most of the time, and Nico's flow is just horrendous. I mean, it's not Seth MacFarlane levels of bad, spoilers for the Season 2 ranking, but it is a pain to listen to. It's to the point where some of his lyrics don't even rhyme. Though I will say, I'm glad he didn't scream the last line like he was originally supposed to. Yes, this was an actual thing that was supposed to happen. I don't know why it was there, nor do I know why Nathan didn't do it, but nevertheless, I'm thankful he didn't. In a way, I'm glad that this battle exists because 1, it's at least funny bad rather than unbearable bad, and 2, it did spawn a remake years later that showed how far ERBP had stepped up their game since then, so looking back on this one is more like a history lesson than anything. Objectively, it sucks ass, but it's one that I like to keep coming back to.
Doing your mom? That's just insulting!
Puff Puff versus Steve Smith. I honestly don't even know why this battle exists. Like, what am I even supposed to say about this one? It's just kind of there. The connection is incredibly weak. It's apparently just fictional characters who wear glasses and a red jacket, and that's it. And it's already negated by the fact that Puff Puff isn't even wearing a jacket in this battle, so what the hell. The lyrics aren't even worth going that much into. There are no disses in this battle. It just consists of song title puns over and over, all of which are from the Your Favorite Martian channel. There are like 1, 2 references to American Dad, like with the Hogwarts spells line, but the rest are just YFM song puns over and over and over. The Puff Puff costume, as I've stated, is unfinished. The Steve Smith costume is just Justin in his regular clothes, and he sounds like he's recording in an empty auditorium with how echoey he is. I really don't have anything else to say. It's a super skippable battle that doesn't really have much going for it, if at all. It sucks. Take it away. Next!
I don't like that song, and I put an end to it.
Well, this music is terrible.
ERBP did it first. The prequel. Actually, this one is kind of surprising. Despite both ERBP and erbparodies releasing their Mozart vs. Skrillex battles in the same year, erbparodies actually released theirs first in January, while ERBs didn't come out until April. What? How did that happen? How did these two battles with the same specific matchup release in the same year, with the fan-made channel releasing theirs first before the official channel? It's not like this was a super popular matchup anyways, there's not really much of a connection besides musicians. What gives? But yeah, it doesn't take a genius to know which version of the matchup is better executed.
Just an animal that can't make music worth shit. Take that ink pen and feather and shove them up your dick. You can't compose or get any hoes. I got plenty of cash to give, so suck my big load.
This one is just really bad, like embarrassingly bad. For a battle involving famous musicians, it sure does not really have all that much of a grasp on what music actually is. The best thing I can say about this battle is that the beat is actually pretty fitting. It's a classical music theme mixed with dubstep instrumentals, again, in the same vein as ERB's version. The problem is that neither of these two rappers can flow for shit.
I'm the king of compose, bitch. Can't you hear? I will bang your belly on the first of the year. You're a gypsy hooker. You like it in the ear. Cut some of that damn hair off. Use it for a beer.
The rapping is either too slow and stretches to fit the beat, or it goes completely off flow and just totally messes with the battle structuring. It's like they were confused about what direction the beat was going in and just decided to wing it as it went on. The lyrics, as you'd expect, are just complete nonsense. It's just pretty much the level of sex jokes I described earlier with Harry vs. Percy. Only instead of Harry Potter sex jokes, it's music sex jokes. Pick your poison, both are equally cringe. No wait, actually this battle is better because it has this line.
Any guy named Skrillex probably sucks dick.
Classic. The costumes are honestly laughable, especially Mozart's, because Justin apparently thought it was a good idea to just put on a bathrobe and sprinkle baby powder onto his hair. Also, apparently Mozart and Skrillex took teleporting lessons from Cartoon Ganondorf, since despite them moving all over the place, the backgrounds never move. It's just them popping up everywhere at random intervals while the backgrounds all stay in one place. And actually, what even are these backgrounds? Mozart's is some sort of blurry clock background, and Skrillex's looks like someone broke their ink pen and splattered it all over the paper. I get wanting to have simple backgrounds that fit the respective rappers, but at least have them, you know, fit the respective rappers. I could keep going, but I think you probably already know what the conclusion is reaching here. It doesn't do a good job at representing either musician, it sucks as a battle on its own, and honestly you're just better off watching the ERB version. Also, fun fact about the ERB version. They once did a live taping of this battle on stage, and halfway through they brought in the actual Skrillex to rap with them. And half the time, real Skrillex just looks like he doesn't want to be there. I just think that's pretty neat.
You're insecure. You're insecure.
Hey, remember One Direction? Yeah, I wish I didn't either.
Liar!
Alright, fine, I'm kidding. I never really hated One Direction. Hell, I never even really got into it when they were still a thing. I heard What Makes You Beautiful and liked it enough, but that was really it for me. But from what little I do know about them, I will say this matchup was at least serviceable, if not a little obvious. Beatles versus One Direction. Popular boy band versus popular boy band. Kind of a no-brainer. But I do have a question. Out of the 4 Beatles you could have chosen for this matchup, why go for Paul McCartney? I mean, I guess he's not a terrible choice, but wouldn't it have made more sense to have it be Harry Styles versus John Lennon, considering that Lennon is arguably the most well-known of the Beatles? I don't know, I just think it would be fitting. Anyways, Harry Styles vs. Paul McCartney is the 5th episode of ERB Parodies and was made in early 2013. And trust me, it shows. Like, it's badly stuck in that year. The battle has your typical bad Season 1 battle tropes, bad green screen, subpar costumes like this goofy-ass wig for Harry and the Guitar Hero controller for Paul, choppy editing, lame-ass beat, and of course, lyrics full of gay jokes. My favorite. This one in particular has some really odd visual choices at times, even for early Season 1. Harry Styles' entire first verse is this weird motorcycle shot, where it's just a motorcycle front PNG in front of Harry just standing in one place. I guess his later beach background resembles the music video for What Makes You Beautiful, which I guess makes sense, but that doesn't explain Paul's background just being this colorful stock video with a weird iMovie filter over it. It doesn't scream Beatles to me, it just looks like it was thrown together at the last second, which, given that this is Season 1, it probably was. That'd also probably explain why they had Justin play literally every single Beatles and 1D member that isn't Harry or Paul. Seriously, this just looks silly. The lyrics, as you'd expect, have barely any actual song references from either Beatles or One Direction. What it mainly consists of instead is Harry calling the Beatles old and Paul calling 1D gay. And yeah, that's basically the entire battle in a nutshell. The Beatles are old, 1D is gay. It's just that over and over. Never mind the cultural impact the Beatles have had on not only music but pop culture as a whole, they are just a bunch of old grandpas.
That is bloody lovely!
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have as much to say on this battle as one might have hoped, but really, all you need to know is that this battle sucks and is about as outdated as One Direction themselves.
Yes!
Blue wants to replace me with some spotlight-stealing son of a bitch named Joe.
Ah, Steve versus Joe. My old friend. How could I not remember you? You were the first ERBP I ever saw, and possibly the first fan-made battle I ever saw as well. You are my introduction to the fan-made rap battle scene in the first place, and you are just as delightfully horrible as I remember you being. So, for some reason in early 2013, ERB Parodies decided to make one of their battles a same-universe Blues Clues battle, between the original host Steve Burns and his brother/replacement Joe. Also, side note, as much as I and the rest of the world love Steve, and for good reason, I never got the immense hatred towards Joe. He was funny and charming, and it genuinely looked like he was having a good time being in the world of Blues Clues. Of course, nothing will ever truly replace Steve, but I feel Joe was a good way to have the series carry on in his absence. Unfortunately, not many other people in 2013 felt that way, which is why we got this battle. You did this. I blame every single one of you. There is so much to talk about with this battle given how infamous it is. So much that I don't even think I could fully explain the masterpiece that is Steve versus Joe. It transcends simple explanation. But for the best interest of the people watching this video, I will try my best to break this up into different mini-sections in order to fully dive into whatever this clusterfuck of a battle is, and explain exactly why it is the best, worst battle ever made. Let's skidoo into this shit. The concept. First off, the very idea of making a same-universe battle and having it be Steve versus Joe of all things is incredibly odd to say the least, especially when it's this matchup. I'm not against the idea of Blues Clues characters being used in rap battles, nor am I against the idea of same-universe battles in general, and I get wanting to make a battle involving Steve, but putting him against Joe already raises some red flags. Fandom rivalry aside, Steve and Joe are canonically brothers in the actual show, and are actually pretty friendly towards each other on multiple occasions. The in-universe reason for Steve leaving the show was because he was going to college, and wanted someone else to live in the house and play Blues Clues with the rest of the gang while he was away, and Joe was already his pre-established brother before that happened. In both the episodes Joe's First Day and Steve Goes to College, whenever Steve talks about Joe, it's clear that he has a great amount of love and respect for him, and is more than happy to let him take over the role as the host. And on Joe's side, while he's eager to get to know the gang and play Blue's Clues with all of them, he still loves and cares a great deal about his brother, to the point of planning a full-on surprise party for him in Steve Goes to College. Personality-wise, both Joe and Steve have the same amount of childlike wonder, which does lead to them being admittedly naive at times, but still ultimately well-meaning at heart. Never in any part of the show do either Steve or Joe have any jealousy or resentment towards each other. Quite the exact opposite, in fact. It's just not who they are. So pitting them against each other already goes against both their characters, which should be obvious to anyone who grew up with these characters, even if you weren't a big fan of Joe taking over. Not to mention, having a same universe battle idea is fine on its own, but having it be Blue's Clues of all things is really strange, for the lack of a better term. At least with something like L versus Light, that one conceptually made sense, as not only were they actual rivals in the show, but there was more than enough material in the Death Note universe to work with. With Blue's Clues, there's not really much you could get out of this deliberately simple preschool universe that would justify putting two characters from the same universe against each other. Steve and Joe are fine on their own separately, but when you put them against each other, there's not really much you can diss either on without at least one of them sounding hypocritical. Steve and Joe do have some differences, but conceptually they do the same thing. Find Blue's Clues while being overly childlike, interact with the cast, and get help from the audience. Brotherly relationship aside, what would Steve even diss Joe on other than Joe replacing him? I know I'm usually a huge advocator that you can make a good battle out of practically any matchup no matter how silly it is, but this is honestly one of the few exceptions with how much it fundamentally does not work. The casting. This part is interesting to talk about because I feel that, for the time, this could have actually worked, but it's ever so slightly fucked up because of either the deliberate choices made or just what they had at the time. For Joe, he's played by Justin, which, fair enough, there weren't a whole lot of options at the time, and he wasn't the worst choice they could have gotten. And despite the lack of squares on his shirt, it is at least colored orange like what we usually see Joe wear. However, his acting is a whole nother story. It's very clear that there wasn't a storyboard or anything for this battle, so what we're left with is Joe just kind of standing awkwardly and doing weird poses at times that don't fit with what the lyrics are saying, or generally any actions you see a human being actually do. It's as if he had no direction for what he was supposed to do, so he was just making shit up as he went along, which makes his acting incredibly awkward. His mic quality is also really shitty and overblown, which, to be honest, I'm not one to talk either, but it makes his audio all the more hard to listen to. But it's not as bad as what they did with Steve. Now, granted, the actor they chose to play Steve, in this case Hunter Tolliver, actually wasn't bad casting on its own. He had the right hair and build for Steve. I will even go out to say that, for the time, this actually could have been the perfect casting. But then you see the costume he chose to wear for Steve and you immediately regret everything. Like, holy shit, this is the first thing you see after the opening logo, and already practically everything is wrong. Disregarding the crappy MS Paint background, the low quality text, and the fact that proportions are thrown out the window, what the hell made them think it was a good idea to wear a salmon-colored polo shirt for a character that noticeably does not wear a salmon-colored polo shirt? Part of what made Steve as iconic of a character as he is was the green-striped rugby shirt he wore for practically every episode, to the point where green stripes were a running motif for a lot of what Steve owned, right down to the crayons he used. It's an iconic part of his costume and made him instantly recognizable, even to non-Blue's Clues fans. So what happened here that made Hunter decide to wear a shirt that didn't even look remotely close? Was it that hard to just go to a thrift store or something and buy a green striped shirt there? Or, heck, even wear anything with the color green on it? And before you bring up that he was using a green screen and therefore wearing green would just key him out, in that case just use a blue screen. I mean, at least Joe's shirt was colored orange, how do you mess Steve up? This is beyond parody material. Even in the earlier days of YouTube, this was unacceptable. Oh yeah, nice flipping off the camera too. The visuals. The editing is worth talking about because it somehow perfectly manages to be both incredibly lazy and incredibly headache-inducing at the same time, and that's not an easy accomplishment. Too lazy is something like Harry vs. Percy, where it has little to no movement for the characters and or backgrounds. Too headache-inducing would be something like Walmart vs. Target, again, spoilers, where it makes the most baffling choices in how nothing flows together. Steve vs. Joe somehow managed to accomplish both. It has your basic faraway shot / close-up shot editing at times, but the keying and animations are so bad that it turns into a huge eyesore the whole way through. Steve's green screen is okay, but Joe's is so awful it makes him look like an ugly pixelated smudge on the screen, complete with poor lighting, seizure-inducing flickering, and holes in random places, which doesn't make his awkward acting any more pleasant to sit through. And not only that, but it has no sense of continuity either. Sometimes it'll randomly cut to Joe sitting on his chair, when just a millisecond ago he was standing up. No transition or anything, just poof, he's sitting now. But hey, at least Joe's actually able to sit down. Steve can only bend his knees a little bit while this awful, choppy keyframing teleports him in front of a chair. And speaking of keyframing, apparently this battle's idea of animation is to just do choppy frame-by-frame animation whenever it needs a PNG or even a whole character to move, and it looks god-awful every single time. Nothing in this looks realistic in the slightest, and all the PNGs just look like they're floating above the wrappers, even when it's apparently supposed to look like they're grabbing or holding it. The animation of Joe dropping slippery soap, Steve holding up a letter, Steve holding his notebook, and nothing else. There's nothing to see. Don't ask what happens next. It's totally fine. I get that Blue's Clues isn't exactly the most realistic looking of children's shows, but come on, they at least had physical props they could hold and interact with. What made you resort to this? And that's not even getting into the backgrounds. Both are equally terrible, but for very different reasons. The background for Steve is the living room with the thinking chair and side table, which is fitting and a good choice on its own. But when you actually get a closer look at this version, you start to notice just how off it looks. Mainly, the poorly drawn telephone, the white edges around the thinking chair, the MS Paint looking picture frame with generic text for the erbparodies logo, the lack of a wall frame, the floor being this pink blob instead of a carpet, and the wallpaper being too fucking big. Considering that a majority of other battles both before and after this one had their backgrounds taken from Google Images, why couldn't you have done the same for this one? It certainly wouldn't have looked worse than this sloppily put together background. And yet it's still better than Joe's background. What even is this supposed to be? The only thing I can get out of this is it being orange like Joe's shirt, but even then, what made them choose to have a blank orange wall with a huge tile spinning floor and a single carpet? It's so boring and ugly. No defining features, no resemblance to Blue's Clues in the slightest, just pure monotony. Which, to make this even worse, was exactly the opposite of what Blue's Clues looked like. The show's world was vibrant and colorful, having tons of definable features to each room and location, and overall looked friendly and inviting. The set pieces resembling craft paper looks like something a child would make, yet you can tell the heart put into making it look the way it is. This just looks like a blank, generic room that needs to be repainted. It's ugly, it doesn't look inviting, and it's just not Blue's Clues. And we haven't even gotten to the lyrics yet. Oh boy. The lyrics. Out of all the Season 1 battles from the Epic Rap Battle Parodies channel, this one has to have the most bafflingly awful lyrics I have ever heard. There is not a single line or lyric in this battle that can actually be considered like it was written for anything but a bad satire. In just 2 short minutes, it makes all the wrong writing decisions that you could possibly think of, and it is glorious. The writing for this battle can be summarized in 2 basic sections: sex jokes and butchered Blue's Clues jokes. I don't even think I need to mention how out of character both Joe and Steve are. It was already kind of a given from the start. I know this is a rap battle, and in it you're supposed to have the opponents diss each other, but there are ways to make friendly characters work in a rap battle while staying mostly in character. Joe's lines in both of his verses mainly consist of shit like, "I replaced you, bitch," or "I'm better than you," or insert Blue's Clues sex joke pun here. He does manage to get in a few details about Steve Burns' life, like his album Songs for Dust Mites, which at least shows he did some research, but it clearly wasn't enough, since it's overshadowed by such thrilling lyrics such as, "You look like a queer," and "I'll kick you out the door like it was a Sparta kick." What makes this all the more uncomfortable to watch is that Joe is directing the sex jokes towards Steve, which, 1, why would you even have sex jokes in a Blue's Clues battle to begin with, and 2, again, Steve and Joe are brothers. I don't know if this was an oversight on the writer's part to begin with, but knowing this information makes lyrics such as, "I'll meet you in the bathroom, give you my Joe and tell," 10 times more uncomfortable than they usually would be. Also, I find it funny how Joe disses Steve for wearing a green striped shirt, given how Steve's shirt looks in the actual battle. 10 out of 10 writing, guys. And Steve's lines really aren't much better. Granted, they are thankfully a lot less sex-driven than Joe's lyrics, but here they're swapped out for undercooked, basic disses, and Blue's Clues references without doing anything clever with them. Much like with Joe, Steve's lyrics are mostly just, "I'm better than you," and "You replaced me but you're pathetic" over and over. That is, until he says this.
Let's all go find Blue's Clues. Here's our clue. Your hairstyle makes you look like a Jew.
Do I need to say anything? Like, I feel that one speaks for itself. Like, aside from the obvious complaint that this line on its own makes no sense, seriously, what does Joe's hairstyle have to do with Jews? This line is just completely out of left field and unneeded for reasons that should be obvious. But hey, at least it's only one part in Steve's verse. Surely the rest of his parts can't be that bad.
Oh, little hoe, why don't you go back to my talking table? Add your list of those not fascinating fables. Nobody likes you, they bitch about you, rotten teeth, they like him, Steve.
I regret everything. So yeah, as you can probably tell by this point, Steve vs. Joe is an absolute failure of a battle in pretty much every regard. Shit audio, shit visuals, shit costumes, and very, very shit writing. It disconnects so hard from Blue's Clues that it's spectacular, and as a battle on its own, it's even worse. This is what the kids call epic fail. So why isn't it at the bottom? Why is it only at number 8 on this 15 battle list? Because, weirdly, I morbidly love this battle. Like, yeah, it's an absolute failure of a battle, but that's honestly what makes it so endearing. The way it absolutely falls flat on its face in practically every aspect just makes it a beautiful train wreck to watch, especially watching it 10 plus years after it was made. Watching it and getting to actually see how terrible it is makes it an absolute blast to witness. It's pretty much the Shark Tale of ERB parodies, a failure in every aspect, yet that's what makes it a hell of a lot more enjoyable to watch than a bland, forgettable bad battle. It's a time capsule of its time that can never truly be recreated, and I will not be forgetting it anytime soon. Still sucks though.
My face is a book. Get it? Face novel?
Well, this matchup totally isn't dated in the slightest. Tom Anderson versus Mark Zuckerberg. The battle that makes me realize just how old this series really is. It's the 6th battle of the overall series, right in between Harry vs. Paul 1 and Merchant vs. Happy Mask Salesman. And while I don't have many nice things to say about all 3 of those battles, I will say that Tom vs. Mark is at least marginally better than the other 2. Marginally, it's still bad. First, horrible outdatedness aside, I will say the matchup did at least make sense for the time it was made. Facebook was and still is a major multi-million-dollar social media company, yet believe it or not, MySpace was once the king of social networking in its earlier days. It had millions of users, was well known by pretty much everyone in the 2000s era, and even once surpassed Facebook in the amount of profits it made. Of course, that didn't really last long, but still. MySpace was a pretty big deal in the earlier days of social media, so at the time it made perfect sense to put these social media creators together in a battle. So I won't knock against this battle too much for being outdated. These things just happen with time. And I will admit, this battle does have some good things about it. There are a few lines in this that show they did do some actual research on the characters, such as referencing Tom's past of being a hacker, or Mark dropping out of Harvard, and especially the line about Google Plus having more users than MySpace when it was first integrated. I do like Tom's second verse where he basically just rips into Mark and his website for the harm it causes. I thought the last line was kinda clever, and I liked the little lag effect on the Farmville line. It's basic, but it works. But yeah, just like the sites themselves, this battle does a lot more bad than it does right. I'd say the 2 biggest problems with the battle are the editing and almost the entirety of Mark Zuckerberg's verses. The editing is incredibly choppy, not Steve vs. Joe levels, but still unpleasant. It's especially bad when Mark's second verse goes the Ron Weasley route and just has Mark sit in one place without having him move in the slightest. Tom's costume being a white shirt is fine. It was honestly the best they could do given what they had to work with. But Nathan looks practically nothing like Mark Zuckerberg. I guess he was basing his look off of the photos where he's wearing a casual shirt, but even then, what's with the champion's hat? I've certainly never seen any photos of Mark wearing something like that. Why is it that Mark Zuckerberg gets a hat in this series but Ash Ketchum doesn't? And speaking of Mark Zuckerberg, his verses in the battle just flat out suck. His lines are too short for the beat, so he has to try to stretch the pronunciations out, and what lines he does have are so empty and shallow that it feels like an early first draft that never got rewritten. It's nice to know that early erbparodies was capable of writing such brilliant and thought-provoking lyrics such as, "Here lies a bitch," and "Your website caused more deaths than the Holocaust." I mean, God, at least Tom Anderson's verses were mostly competent in the amount of decent disses it had, mostly, and knew how to actually diss his opponent. Mark just has practically nothing. Facebook might have won over MySpace in the end, but in terms of battle rapping, I think it's clear who the real winner is. Overall, while I don't think Tom vs. Mark is a good battle by any means, I will admit it's not the worst either, at least in Season 1 standards. It's a mini time capsule of what the internet was like back then. Well-intentioned, but ugly and disorganized.
Hello!
Boy, I'm gonna kick your ass.
Vault Boy vs. Cole Phelps, the grandfather of epic rap battle parodies, the one that started the whole thing. Let's pause for a moment of respect, shall we? That's enough. Begin!
So let's do this.
Vault Boy vs. Cole Phelps, the first ever episode of erbparodies, and one of the most well-known, oldest fan-made epic rap battles. Certainly not the oldest, there have been plenty of other fan-made rap battles long before erbparodies was a thing, but I'd argue this was among the most influential of old fan-made rap battles. I'd argue if it weren't for this battle, fan-made rap battles as a whole probably wouldn't be as widespread as they are today, much less to the extent of having an entire fan-made community revolving around them. The impact of this battle cannot be denied. With that being said, it kinda did not age well as a battle on its own. I guess I should start by saying the more obvious stuff first. The video is really, really bad. Apparently neither Justin nor Nathan had green screens at the time, so they tried to resort to different methods, and neither of them look all that good even for the time. Nathan, playing Vault Boy, decided to film in what looks to be his basement, which did avoid any bad keying issues altogether, but also does lead to more limited movements, combined with bad camera quality. There's this weird blue tint over Nathan's entire video, which I have no idea if it was intentional or not, but it overall looks really fuzzy and not good. The most editing we get out of Vault Boy's verses are a couple zoom-ins at times, and a whole lot of Vault Boy PNGs, some of which even go over the subtitles for some reason. The costume is also really sloppy as well. It does have the right colors, but it has the wrong, well, everything else. Vault Boy's design is simple, sure, but it still has a definable look to it. If anything, it looks more like a jumpsuit with a yellow stripe and belt, something that isn't at all replicated by Nathan throwing on a blue jacket over a yellow shirt. And there's one thing missing here, I just can't quite put my finger on it. Oh yeah, his hair is supposed to be blonde. As for Cole Phelps, the costume is technically fine and does resemble what the character wears in the game, but everything else, oh boy. I don't even think I need to point out how terrible the keying is. I mean, just look at it. But what I will do instead is mention how it got to be this bad. Before erbparodies was a thing, Justin ran a short-lived rap battle series on his own channel called XP9 Rap Battles, which was essentially the beta erbparodies. Real or fictional characters rapping against each other, all made on a budget of -$5. And in pretty much almost every single battle in that series, Justin didn't have a green screen, often filming in his own bedroom, or in one case outside of his house. So when erbparodies was started, Justin still didn't have a green screen to speak of, but still wanted to key himself out. So he chose to film on his wall. His light gray, not at all green, regular, everyday wall. Turned out great. The lyrics to the battle are hard for me to comment on, since, again, I haven't played Fallout or LA Noire, so I get practically none of these references. But from what I've been told, most of Cole Phelps' lines don't make sense, since most of the disses he's saying apparently don't even apply to Vault Boy at all. He's mostly making references to things that other Fallout characters did, like blowing up Megaton or using a lockpick and a cord to open a door. Vault Boy is a mascot, not an actual person, so where are these disses coming from? Again, haven't played Fallout, so just take my words with a grain of salt, but something isn't sitting right here. My favorite part is when Cole Phelps says he solves cases with a magnifying glass, and then the camera zooms in on his hand holding absolutely nothing. That's just gold right there. Vault Boy's lyrics aren't much better. If anything, they're actually kind of worse. For some reason, it decides to do something similar to what Puff Puff vs. Steve Smith would do 1 month later, and bloat his entire verse with bad puns relating to the character, only this time it's achievements you can get in Fallout. Granted, it's not as cringe-inducing or forced as what that other battle did, but it's still not that great either. The only other thing worth mentioning is his flow. While Cole's flow was mainly consistent, Vault Boy just quickly goes off flow and throws off the entire structure of his first verse, and it's kinda painful to listen to. So yeah, Vault Boy vs. Cole Phelps definitely hasn't aged well as a battle on its own by today's standards, but honestly, despite its many flaws, I don't hate it at all. Again, this was the battle that kinda kickstarted the entire rap battle community, and I honestly have a lot of internal respect for it as a result. Without this battle, we probably wouldn't have had as many amazing battles as we do nowadays, especially not to the extent it's at. It has kind of the same impact as ERB's John Lennon vs. Bill O'Reilly, where the battle itself kinda sucks on its own, but it can be thanked for the impact that it's made. Godspeed, Vault vs. Cole, and happy 10+ years on YouTube.
Well, say hello to my little friends!
Al Capone vs. Blackbeard is the 35th episode of Epic Rap Battles of History and the 2nd episode of Season 3, and I feel it's criminally underrated, no pun intended. It's catchy as hell, has a ton of solid disses, the performances are top notch, and... Oh wait. Al Capone vs. Tony Montana is the 11th episode of Epic Rap Battle Parody, and while there are a couple miscellaneous aspects I like about it, it's still not very good at all. First and foremost, I think the beat is actually really catchy, and is honestly my favorite Season 1 beat. It's got some good pacing to it so it doesn't feel too drawn out, and the mood fits perfectly with this matchup. The costumes are decent for what they could work with, and the flow isn't the best, but it certainly flows better than some of the other Season 1 battles.
I'm the Godfather. What are you, political prisoner? I'll tell you where the money is, you're not a good listener.
You massacred on the Valentine's Day, Mr. Al Capone, the reason why you were probably forever alone.
And the lyrics actually aren't my major problem with the battle. They're fine for what they are, except for that "say hello to my little friend" reference I was clearly just slapped on at the end because they needed to fit that line in somehow. It's the video that's a major problem. First, the backgrounds, while fitting for the characters, feel inconsistent. Al Capone's is just constantly moving to the side for some reason, while Capone himself stays in one place, yet Montana's is completely stationary just with a poorly keyed out cloud time-lapse. It's really disorienting and the two don't fit with each other, which makes me question why they had Capone's background move at all. Maybe they just wanted to have a sense of motion, which I kinda understand, but was there no reason why they couldn't have just done what they did with Tony's background and have it be in one place with a visible cloud time-lapse? This just throws perspective right out the window. Second, the body acting. While I think the costumes are at least decent, the acting leaves a lot to be desired on both sides. Justin as Capone is just really stiff and feels like he doesn't know what he's doing, his lip syncing is terrible, his cigar just looks like a rolled up piece of paper, which it probably is. He's holding a shotgun even though the lyrics mention him having a Tommy gun, and when he tries to do stuff in the background, it just comes across as incredibly awkward. It's especially painfully obvious in Capone's second verse, which doesn't have any editing in it at all. It's just Capone standing in one place without moving, while a bunch of tiny random cameos are behind him. My favorite bit is the shot where, when Capone tries to twirl his shotgun, he fucking drops it. That was a mistake he made while filming, and yet they left that in. And not only that, but they put it in twice. In the same shot. As for Montana, oh dear. I did say that Capone's lip syncing was terrible, but I think Tony's may actually be even worse. Like, it's not even close to what the audio was saying. Apparently Nathan had like an hour to film and didn't have enough time to memorize his lines, so that's why his lip syncing is so off. But that's just further proof that you shouldn't rush your projects, otherwise stuff like this happens. It actively takes away from the battle and makes the final product look a lot sloppier than you intended it to be. It's the same issue when people use stock footage rappers for battles that they didn't film for. You should spend more time matching your voice up to your lips. Also, the final line has him do a stance where he's supposed to look like he's holding a gun, like the scene it's referencing, except here he's holding nothing. Capone had the wrong gun, but at least it was a gun. So yeah, overall this battle is somewhat listenable for the time it was made, but the video brings it down so hard. It's not the worst Season 1 battle by any means, but when it comes to Al Capone related rap battles, you probably already know which one I prefer. Yeah, that's right. Al Capone vs. Green Goblin by Snakebite 126, baby! Yeah, that's the real shit right there!
It's the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain.
Alright, now we're moving into what I consider to be the first halfway decent ERB Parodies episode on this list, Tom Sawyer vs. Huckleberry Finn. Surprisingly, this one actually isn't as terrible as most of you might remember it being.
What? What? What?
Now, it's not all that good either. It has a lot of the same problems that most Season 1 ERB Parodies battles have: subpar green screens, decent but still crappy costumes, Google image backgrounds, and a good bit of questionable lyrics. There are a couple other noticeable problems as well, like Huck's second verse just completely forgetting to have rhymes in it.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
But honestly, I did manage to find some good stuff in this battle as well. For starters, it's probably the catchiest Season 1 battle by far. The beat is great and gets my head bopping to the rhythm, and it actually fits the tone of the battle's characters. And despite the lyrics themselves, the flow is pretty decent as well, and contributes greatly to the battle's catchiness. I think the Batman with no inheritance line is pretty funny, as is the I don't give a Huck finisher. They're not mind-blowing, they just got me to chuckle a little bit. I think definitely the highlight of the battle is Xander as Tom Sawyer. Even for the time, it was pretty much perfect casting, which carried over to when Uberosity got him to play it again for the 7 Deadly Sins Royale in 2017. I think he does a good job at capturing the snarky, mischievous personality that Tom Sawyer is usually known for, so points to him for managing to get at least one character in Season 1 right. Honestly, I'd say this battle is a C- at best. Not good, but just scrapes itself up enough to be considered not terrible, which, for Season 1, is more than I can ask for.
I wouldn't exactly call you original.
ERBP did it first. James Bond vs. Austin Powers is the finale to Season 1, and was also the first one to have a custom beat specifically made for this battle, like how I mentioned earlier. The connection to this one is definitely more well known, so it at least makes more sense as to how ERB coincidentally did this exact same matchup, unlike with Mozart vs. Skrillex. However, just like with that one, it really doesn't take much guessing to know which channel did the matchup more justice. This one is kinda bad, but it does surprisingly have good things about it. For starters, I think the editing is actually pretty solid, probably the best editing out of any Season 1 battle. Despite the fuzzy camera qualities and green screens for both rappers, there are some decent editing choices, like having James Bond's title card resemble the famous gun barrel shot, or having Austin Powers' background be constantly waving to give it motion. The editing does a fine job at keeping the characters moving, while also not overdosing it to a motion sickness-inducing degree. The beat is really good and fits both these characters pretty much perfectly. It's more serious for Bond's verses and more whimsical for Powers' verses, and both moods fit the spy theme for this battle's matchup. I think it was a wise choice to have the beat be specifically custom made for this battle, since it would have been a challenge otherwise to find a good pre-made beat that was fitting for both characters, or to do what ERB did years later and find two separate fitting beats while making them flow naturally with each other. So I say this beat is good. The lyrics are hard for me to really write about since I haven't seen a single James Bond film and have only seen the first Austin Powers film, so I am not an expert on either of these characters by any means whatsoever. So for me as an outsider, it's a mixed bag for me. I liked a couple of the rhyme schemes that Bond gave in his first verse, and I do think some of the lines were decently written. It is, however, burdened with a lot of lines that are either written in a weak or strange way, or are just straight up filler. One of the lines, from what I've heard, is just straight up wrong, when Austin says,
"It took me 3 movies to beat the bad guy."
Again, I haven't seen all the Austin Powers movies, so I'll take those people's word for it, but I just wanted to throw that out. I honestly think this battle's biggest problem is its casting. The actor for James Bond is Hunter, and his costume is passable minus the lack of a tie, but for some strange reason, they forgot to give Bond a British accent. How do you forget something like that? Having a British accent is pretty much synonymous with James Bond. Even non-fans know about that. It's like forgetting Harry Potter's scar or Mickey Mouse's ears. You just don't do that. What is it with Hunter and him forgetting crucial details about the characters he plays on the series? And as for Austin Powers, who's played by Kevin Crust, the voice is okay, it at least has an accent this time, but the costume is just straight up wrong. Austin Powers is known for having a super colorful wardrobe, given he's a very flamboyant person from the 60s, so why in the hell would he wear a black colorless suit? And without his ruffle, no less. Pretty much the only thing Kevin got right was the glasses, otherwise this was just a complete miscasting, even for the time. Again, not Eminem vs. Macklemore levels of miscasting, but still noticeably bad. Overall, while I do see the issues people have with it, and believe me, there are issues, I don't hate this battle as much as other fans of the series might. Compared to some of the other shit I've seen from this season, I'd say this is one of the more tolerable ones, especially in the editing department. It had good intentions, but it just missed its mark.
It's like
kill you.
Slenderman vs. Enderman. Probably the most 2013 matchup in this entire series. This was the first time erbparodies decided to use a creepypasta character, and it certainly wasn't the last. They then did Jeff the Killer vs. Jack the Ripper a couple months later, then Slenderman vs. Jeff the Killer, and then Eyeless Jack vs. Laughing Jack a few years later. Creepypastas were kind of a huge trend back in the early rap battle days, and even today they seem to be making somewhat of a comeback. And this right here is one of the earliest examples. The matchup itself is pretty obvious, but honestly, I'd say it pulls it off pretty decently, even looking back on it. It does have its obvious cheapness and things to poke fun at, such as Justin using a backwards white baseball cap over his face for Slenderman, and Enderman just not having legs at all. But much like Tom vs. Huck, I did find some actual decent stuff in this battle as well. The lyrics, for the most part, are surprisingly okay. The only one I found a real problem with was Slenderman saying Enderman has a black latex suit for some reason. But otherwise, the vast majority of the lyrics are kinda solid. They have relevant references, decent rhymes, have enough syllables to flow with the beat, and actually make sense for what they are. You'd think for a Season 1 battle involving an overplayed creepypasta character and a Minecraft mob that it'd have a lot of fillery shit in it, but shockingly, it remains pretty consistent in quality, and, real shocker here, it feels like an actual battle. Great job, Season 1, you managed to write lyrics that weren't complete dog shit for once. Even the visuals aren't that bad, at least for 2013 quality. Yeah, the green screens aren't that great, especially on RL Yoshi's side, and like I said, the white baseball cap for Slenderman's face looks really silly, but otherwise there isn't a whole lot to complain about the visuals either. The editing isn't spectacular, but it gets the job done just fine, and it does have some good moments here and there, like the rain effect on one line, and especially the one shot of multiple Slenderman standing in the forest. It looks pretty cool. I am admittedly impressed that they managed to somewhat pull off having Enderman in live action. The makeup looks fine and manages to toe the line of looking reminiscent of the character while also having its own look. And as much as I like to make fun of baseball cap Slenderman, I will say this Slenderman costume looks miles better than what Slender vs. Jeff did 5 months later. Ain't that sad? A simple Season 1 battle still managed to pull off a better looking Slenderman than a huge creepypasta royale in Season 2 did. But for all the compliments I give this battle, and it being better than a majority of other Season 1 battles, it does have its problems as well. For starters, the audio quality is really fuzzy and not mixed well at all. Enderman's voice is too overmodulated, and Slenderman's backup vocals are all over the place, to the point where both of them will be incredibly hard to understand were it not for the subtitles. The beat is also really boring as well. It does technically fit the characters, but it remains the same tone throughout the whole battle and doesn't sound interesting at all. And as decently competent as the lyrics are, they're also not amazing either. There's not really much for them to stand out, and they're not all that memorable or hard-hitting. It's all around a really basic, standard battle that you probably expect out of a matchup like this, especially for the time it was made. But compared to some of the other shit we've seen on this list, I will gladly take a battle that at least tries to be competent over a battle that doesn't try at all. It's a nice standard battle that I had a good time watching, which is impressive on its own for a battle featuring a creepypasta character. And speaking of creepypastas, ladies and gentlemen, we've done it. We've reached the light at the end of the tunnel. The one erbparodies Season 1 battle that sort of rises up above the rest, as it takes the ultimate title of being the one that manages to be the least bad out of this entire season. The crown jewel, the cream of the crop, okay, enough embellishing, it's not that great. It's Jack the Ripper versus Jeff the Killer. This is honestly my favorite matchup from the season, fiction versus history, and both famous serial killers whose names start with J. It's an obvious but creative matchup that makes total sense, and the battle accompanying it is pretty enjoyable as well. While obviously not high quality, especially in the video department, it manages to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that most of the other Season 1 battles fell into, some more than others. For starters, the writing. It's actually decently written pretty much the whole way through. While other battles like Harry vs. Percy or Puff vs. Steve would resort to filler lines and basic references without doing anything with them, Jack vs. Jeff manages to avoid that by actually utilizing its references and working them into the disses themselves. Good examples include, I've only killed people who've had sex, break your Elizabeth stride, it's time for Leather Apron to meet my lovely Leatherface, etc. The references to both characters are actually relevant for the most part, and do make for effective lines, and almost none of them feel out of character for what I would imagine these people would say or do. Even lines such as Jeff calling Jack a hoax actually hold water to it, because in real life, the Dear Boss letter that gave Jack the Ripper his name was widely believed to be a hoax written by British journalists in order to give the stories more publicity. So even the lesser lines of this battle still have weight to them, as they actually have genuine research put into them and weren't written for the sake of filling up the battle's runtime. It's nice to know that at least a couple battles from this season had effort put into the writing. The video, as you'd probably expect, leaves a lot to be desired, especially with the overdone feathering around Jeff that makes him look like a ghost, and the obnoxious Sony Vegas flickering glitches, but one thing I do appreciate about it is some of the visual choices that I could tell they were trying to go for. I think the Jeff the Killer verses in particular have some cool choices, like the way it fades in and out on Jeff murdering some random people, or the final "go to sleep" line having a visual effect over it. Even if it doesn't entirely work out visually, I can still appreciate the visual choices this battle tried to achieve. And while I'm on the topic of visuals, the costumes are pretty decent for what they had to work with. To be fair, since the real Jack the Ripper is unidentified, nobody really knows what his outfit truly looked like. But I'd say this is a pretty good rendition. The striped cloak, the black vest with the red shirt, and the hat covering his eyes from the camera. Even if I didn't initially know from the start that this was supposed to be Jack the Ripper, I think I'd still catch on to it pretty quickly. It's a good costume. Jeff the Killer, awful keying aside, has a decent looking costume as well. The makeup looks fine and does overall resemble how Jeff looked. Much like how I feel about Slender Man vs. Enderman, out of all the Season 1 battles, this is one that felt the most like an actual legit battle. Now, it's not perfect in the slightest, not even close. In fact, this would barely be even passable by today's standard. But compared to some of the actual garbage that the other battles have, this is easily the most competent one by pure comparison. And it's easily the most rewatchable too. It may not be that great, but I'd say it has enough to be considered the best episode of Epic Rap Battle Parodies Season 1. So, that's that. I've finally covered the entirety of Season 1, which means I've gotten most of the series' worst battles out of the way. Now, that doesn't mean we're entirely out of the woods yet. There's still a lot of terribleness to go through in the other seasons when I cover them next. But looking back at this season in particular, while it's clear that none of them hold up to today's standards at all, it's admittedly not hard to imagine how this would have kickstarted such a huge fan-made rap battle phenomenon. If anything, it's interesting to see how such a well-known fan-made rap battle series started from humble beginnings, with a bunch of young teenagers grabbing whatever costumes they could cobble together on a low to non-existent budget and make their own battles based on their favorite YouTube series. These battles might be terrible, they might be silly and nonsensical, but they're also a major part of rap battle history, and that's kind of what makes them charming in their own way. There's really no recapturing this era. Whether we come back to the series to laugh at our own nostalgia or cringe at what the series used to be, there's no doubt Season 1 is one of the most iconic and influential seasons of epic rap battle parodies. 1 season down, 4 more to go. Pray for me. Thank you, and good night.